People have been refused coverage by insurance companies because of the genetic testing results that showed a high potential for medical issues, even if they're all hypothetical and they don't show any symptoms currently. So this brings up the whole issue of privacy rights and the restrictions that could potentially be imposed on businesses and companies regarding insurance and genetic screening. So to connect both the claim and the counterclaim to the real life situation, we have to look at the situation of doctors acting unethically, even if they have good intentions. So we looked at the way of knowing of language, which is often seen in doctors having to face the temptation to withhold information from the patient because they have their best interest in mind. So because the doctors regularly witness the negative outcomes of administering these tests to patients when they have and when the tests have nothing but negative life-altering results that can't actually be impacted by any preemptive measures, the genetic screening will do nothing but cause emotional distress. So ultimately, though, even though the doctors believe that it is better for the patient if they do not know these results, they have to just give the facts and their expert opinion and suggestions, but ultimately they just have to let the patient decide what is best for their health. We saw an example of this in the movie called Whose Life Is It Anyways, which revolves around the controversy of a patient and a doc, whether the patient or the doctors have the right to decide what's best for the patient's health. So the third and final topic we're going to look at today is stem cell research, but first a little background is needed. So the value of stem cells is seen in that they are the basic building blocks of cells and that they aren't a specific type. So research can be done on them. The research that's done on them can be universally applied to all kinds of cells, which saves so many resources and a lot of time. Also, because they're undifferentiated, they can be artificially specialized to create what is needed for transplants for specific patients. And so to answer the question why there is so much controversy around stem cell research, it basically comes down to the fact that some stem cells are human embryonic cells, which raises a lot of ethical questions for people. However, it is very important to realize that stem cell research is not conducted on human embryos that were aborted in any case. All the embryonic cells used in stem cell research are artificially created in a petri dish with in vitro fertilization.
So our claim is scientists have the ethical responsibility to use their extensive knowledge to determine the ambiguous ethical limits within scientific research and experimentation. Our counterclaim to this is because a large amount of stem cell research involves testing on embryonic cells, it is unethical to tamper with human life in an unnatural way. So our ways of knowing we use for the claim is reasoning. There is really no alternate to stem cell research because it is so versatile and useful. Our supportive claims to this is that in a Harvard study, stem cell research led to the finding of a potential cure for Stargardt disease, which is a disease that causes blindness. Another example is that doctors at Johns Hopkins who perform stem cell research has discovered that this leads to groundbreaking discoveries in transplants. They can now artificially manufacture human tissue, and that could potentially lead to the discovery of the creation of more complex organs, which would ultimately help those on the donor wait list for organs that could save them. And stem cell research as a whole has done some great things in terms of cancer treatments. This is how we found out about radiation therapy, and chemotherapy was developed because of stem cell research.
So another way of knowing that we looked at with stem cell research is emotion, because there's an obvious bias for or against stem cell research based on your own personal morals and priorities, especially regarding like religious views. So another way of knowing that we looked at is faith, in that we have to have faith in the scientists' findings and claims that stem cell research is as necessary as they say, and that they are doing the research in as humane a way as they possibly can. And the final way of knowing that we looked at for our claim was intuition, because with this topic that's not black and white, really, we have to kind of intuitively decide whether or not we believe that the human tissue that is grown in laboratories is considered human life or not.
So when looking at the counterclaim, one of the biggest ways of knowing that we used was faith, and this is the faith in religion. Because many religions believe that life starts at conception, this would make stem cell research unethical, and this often trumps the faith in science most of the time. Another way of knowing that we looked at was reasoning. From the point of view that believes that embryonic cells are human life, it is a reasonable conclusion then to deem stem cell research as unethical, since it would technically count as human experimentation. Regardless of religion, if you want to look at it in a reasonable fashion too, by following the line of reasoning that human beings are not things and their life shouldn't be tampered with, even for the sake of the good at the end, stem cell research is something that the people using those reasonings will not believe in, because they do not want to tamper with human life just to benefit stem cell research. Another way we looked at was emotion. It is that feeling that if this is an unborn child and the damages that are done to this unborn child, those are too extreme and too emotional, so that almost outweighs the potential good that can come from stem cell research. It's that whole idea that you're taking an innocent life for the possibility of saving many more innocent lives, but that's still a possibility. There is a difference, however, between stem cells grown via in vitro fertilization in a petri dish versus natural insemination and development that we have to also explore. So there are some different perspectives when we look at this. One of them we've already obviously explained was the religious perspective versus the secular perspective. Another is just the scientific perspective. Scientists that work on embryonic stem cells, they have to face different ethical standards as scientists who are trying to work on bone marrow. They're working on two different types of stem cells. However, any opposition towards stem cell research halts development altogether, because it's kind of coupled under this idea of stem cell research as a whole. With controversial issues, we found that the researchers in question must go the extra length to provide the necessary tools for their methods. They have to present it in a way that people can then value their findings.
So to connect both the claim and the counterclaim to the real life situation, we have to look at the emotional influence, like the personal bias or priorities, which we touched upon with religion and things, as well as the potential impact of future applications or ethical issues. So the research and science that we're doing now, how will that impact future problems that we might face ethics-wise? One example is human cloning, which is, although very far in the future, still relevant with stem cell research, as well as we have to look at how artificially produced human tissue compares to animal lives if we're going to compare to like animal testing, because it's a possibility that stem cell research could provide for an alternative method to animal testing as far as in cosmetics and medical experimentation.
So our conclusion. So basically, the answer to our knowledge question is that in experimental research and scientific testing, scientists have the ethical responsibility to, 1, make difficult ethical decisions regarding when the ends are justified by the means, 2, provide evidence-based reasoning for the chosen methodology as well as the conclusion, and 3, recognize when it's not their responsibility or right to make such certain decisions for others, despite their personal beliefs.
So the implications of this conclusion for our real-life situation, one of them is one of the things we talked about earlier was, does buying cruelty-free products actually affect anything in the grand scheme of things? Is it even worthwhile? So throughout this process of investigating this, we looked at reason when we analyzed data, emotion when we empathized with all the affected parties in each situation. We used intuition in making instinctive inferences, and we finally used faith because we need to trust the authorities to abide by their ethical responsibilities. And if these authorities do not abide by their ethical responsibilities, then our minute contributions would be meaningless. So if we give them the benefit of the doubt, What then are our ethical responsibilities as consumers, assuming that our choices are actually impactful? This leads to further questions such as